Hello and welcome to Hope Unabridged. I'm Casey Brennan.
I'm Angie Elkins.
And today we are going to be talking about joy and how the pursuit of joy and celebration is necessary for our emotional and spiritual health.
So good.
So good. I'm so excited. We're talking to Nicole Zasowski. On her new book, What If It's Wonderful? And what if it is?
What if? I mean, listen, I was challenged recently because beginning of the new year, everyone likes to create, goals, whatever, resolutions. I was challenged to create what if statements.
Oh, I like that.
So what if I get in great shape this year? And what if I take a fantastically fulfilling vacation with my family? Just that statement, what if, puts such a positive spin on it.
It does, rather than do these things or then you're immediately disappointed if you don't.
That's right.
I love that.
And so I love the title of her book, What If It's Wonderful? Because I think that we're often thinking, oh, this has got so much potential to go wrong.
Yeah.
But what if it's wonderful?
What if it is? I love that. Well, Nicole is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she is a writer and a speaker based in the state of Connecticut, where she lives with her husband and son. And as an old soul who wears her heart proudly on her sleeve, Nicole loves using her words to help others find an enduring peace and joy outside of circumstance. So grab something warm and cozy, a warm cup, and cozy up with this conversation. Welcome, Nicole. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, I'm so happy to join you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm so excited to dive into this book, What If It's Wonderful? And it really, some of the things in here really spoke to my heart. As an Enneagram 7, which I know you are not, but but it particularly talks about, releasing your fears and choosing joy. And sometimes it's hard to choose joy. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like in your own life and why you wrote this book?
Yeah, whenever we go through something difficult, whether it be the loss of a loved one or maybe a betrayal, there's the loss itself, the triggering event, and then there's the cost. The cost which would be the impact to our sense of identity, who we are, our personal value, or our sense of safety and security. And it took me a long time to recognize that one of the main costs in my life was the impact to my willingness to embrace joy and find the courage to celebrate. I would walk into seasons or, good news or breakthrough, and it was accompanied by a lot of fear in my life.
Yeah. One of the things that you talk about is letting go of the lies that we've believed about happiness and just in celebration in general. What are some of those lies?
Yeah, I think especially in faith circles, we have a lot of ideas about the sensation of happiness. And either we've deemed it as wrong or something that takes us away from God. So often I think we talk about how pain, one of the gifts of pain, even though we're not going to call a hard thing good, one of the gifts of pain is it cultivates a deeper relationship with Christ. But we don't often talk about how joy, too, can be an avenue of emotional and spiritual growth in our lives.
Yes.
And so we can connect with God in the light of our joy. I think where we have to be careful is for us as people who have put our trust in Jesus, is happiness it's good. It's just not the complete joy that's available to us.
Yeah. You touched on something really that spoke to my heart. And that is, how do you, it's makes me want to tear up because how do you stay close to the God that you found in the pain while still celebrating joy? I went through a period of that and just finding God in a new way in pain. And it was this really intimate time. And then you get on the other side of that. And how can you maintain that intimacy, but be okay with hey, I'm joyful now. I'm celebrating. I'm in a good spot. What does that look like?
Thank you for sharing that, because I really resonate with that experience. I think so many of us do. We picture God being so tender and close and walking us over ground that's really hard. And then we almost picture him, when we arrive at a different kind of season saying, okay, let me know when you need me again. And that's one of the reasons I wrote this book too. I was really curious, like that can't be true, that God is not just as present in the light of our joy. And there's many ways that I talk about in the book of how we can cultivate and celebrate with God as an avenue of intimacy with him. One of my favorites is Thanksgiving. And what I love about this is our circumstances don't have to change. We don't have to add anything to our lives in order to celebrate. It's about making a beautiful life with God right where you are through the practice of Thanksgiving. And we often talk about gratitude. And what gratitude does is it helps us note and name those joys in our life that we might be tempted to miss. But what Thanksgiving does is it's an avenue to celebrate the gift with the giver. So there's this beautiful connection that happens in our relationship with God when we can celebrate and delight in his gifts with him.
Yeah.
You mentioned just a few minutes ago that you found yourself in a place where good things would happen or good things would come and they were accompanied by fear. Was that something you realized easily, or did it take some digging for you to kind of get down to the fear?
To be honest, it took some digging. I was very, very aware of the impact in other areas of my life. I have a long history of wounds of inadequacy and rejection. And so those were easier to identify because they were familiar.
Yeah.
This impact was new. And I think I was confused by it because I thought, well, joy is just supposed to be fun. It shouldn't, there's something wrong if it's accompanied by fear or feels super vulnerable. Like this should be easy. Celebration should come naturally. Why is it a discipline? It should be just this natural reaction. And so I think it was harder to spot because on the surface, it doesn't seem like joy should be vulnerable or difficult.
I love that you just said discipline. Can you talk a little bit about celebration as a discipline, as a spiritual discipline?
Yes, it's not one we talk about often. I think usually we approach it a bit like dessert, like it's nice to have, but not essential to the Christian life. And I feel the opposite. I think it's such an important practice for a couple reasons. When we think about incorporating celebration as a discipline, at first I was really annoyed because I just wanted it to come easily. But there's so much empowerment and agency when we consider it an actual practice that's available to us regardless of our circumstances, that it's not just something that's sitting on the other side of a goal achieved or a dream realized or some sort of change. But this is actually a practice. If we look at what this looks like in the Bible, the Israelites didn't celebrate because there was time and space for it or because they had done a really good job and felt they earned it. No, this was about remembering who God was. And they celebrated because it was time to do so. So when we can practice it because it's time, we recognize, oh, no, this is about remembering God's faithfulness to us.
Can we talk a little bit about practically how we can do that? So I'm going to just throw out a scenario for you. Okay. So let's say we find ourselves in a great scenario, something that we would normally, you would think we would want to celebrate, like maybe we get a new job. Okay. That's exciting. And it's even something that we feel like validates us in a way, as good at what we do and that kind of thing. But inside or maybe underneath it, we're thinking, it's just a matter of time. They'll figure out I'm not as good as all that. It's kind of that like waiting for the shoe to drop feeling. There's another shoe that's going to drop, or that, cynical kind of attitude. Talk about that. Like, how is that opposed to joy? And How do we process through that thought?
That's a great question, because I think that happens all the time.
Yeah.
We experience this elation of good news, and our brain is not helpful to us here. Our brain is like Teflon with joy and Velcro with negativity. So we're not fighting on neutral ground. And I think that's just important to understand, because it really helps us key into that discipline aspect, that this left on neutral, we don't really drift toward joy, even in the light of good news, like a new job where we feel really personally validated. I think a couple things come to mind. There's this thing called the Hedonic Treadmill in our brains, where we are very quick to adapt to good news. So it's what feels really exciting in the moment will become mundane, or we feel like we start thinking about, ooh, it would have been better if. Right. Or we start thinking about all the ways our celebration could be improved upon. So I think two things. The first is having that joy in the right order. It is a delightful gift. We should absolutely celebrate when we experience good news or breakthrough. But if it's sitting awkwardly in the wrong place in our hearts, if it is holding our identity, if it's holding our sense of security, you can plan on being disappointed. What sits at the center of our affection will determine the satiation of our joy. And not expecting more joy from the gift than it was meant to give, even if it's a really great thing.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing is just savoring that experience, and really, like, if you just got the offer over the phone, or you're sitting in someone's office and they're offering you the job, just asking real quick your five senses what they're going to remember about that moment, your five traditional senses. So what am I tasting? What am I hearing? What am I feeling? What am I seeing? And what am I smelling? And that will just help your brain record it as a special memory to go back to, especially for a rainy day when maybe those affirmations might be harder to access.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, that's
I
really
love that.
good.
You've said that joy is hard for you to come by. Like, it takes a little bit for you to get there. For me, growing up, joy was a coping mechanism. Like it was if things are going wrong and I'm the oldest of 6. So if things were going wrong, I would immediately be like, let's do this fun thing. And and it almost felt like half my childhood was inauthentic in a way, because I was constantly trying to produce joy for everyone else. Right. And so what do we risk though? Because now, I'm in a healthy place and I've taken the time to really dive deep, and now I can recognize true joy, and I love joy. That's like my thing. Joy is great in a healthy way. But what do we risk if we don't take that time to do authentic joy and authentic celebration and experience that?
Yeah. Something I talk about in the book is the difference between what the Bible would refer to as pleasure seeking, what we might refer to as numbing out or performing. Because there is a difference, isn't there, of active celebration where we're engaged with our feelings, we're engaged with ourselves, we're engaged with our community and with God, and pleasure seeking or escape or numbing that takes us out of the pain. And so one question to ask yourself is, if I saw you doing one or the other, I may not even be able to tell the difference based on what you're actually doing. So it's often not the action, but a great question to ask yourself is, what am I looking for? Am I looking for harmony because I'm feeling really unsafe by the conflict in my home, and I'm feeling the need to perform and just create all this joy as this sort of false peace, but inside I'm not feeling peaceful at all. I'm more performing, afraid of what's going to happen if I don't heighten the joy in the room. Or am I looking to just numb out and not deal with whatever thing is going on? And of course, we know that only kicks the can down the road.
Yeah.
And so, yes, like I said, that true happiness is absolutely a part of our joy. But where we get into trouble is that toxic positivity that cannot have joy and pain in the same room.
Yeah.
And so in order to access joy, it has to dismiss the pain.
Right.
Whereas authentic joy simply trusts God's promises in the midst of pain.
Yes.
So just a second ago, you said something about not expecting the gift to be more than it's meant to be.
Yeah.
How is that different than keeping our expectations low? Because, you talked about your coping mechanism. Yeah. My coping mechanism probably when I was younger was just to keep the expectations low, never worry. It's, if I don't expect it to be amazing or if I don't expect it to be wonderful, then when it's not, everything will be okay. And I'll be able to handle, how I feel about it or the way things turned out. So what's the difference in those two?
That's a great question because I think it could, and I'm glad you asked it because it could sound similar. The difference in the caution I mentioned earlier in not expecting more joy from the gift than it was meant to give is not expecting joy, but not expecting that joy to be a fulfillment in terms of our identity and sense of security. So God is constantly providing beautiful gifts and delight in our daily lives in seasons of both pain and joy. But if I expect even the best of those gifts, like a child or marriage or a certain friendship, a great community, these are wonderful things to delight in and find joy in. And I hope you do. But even the best gifts in this life that most of us long for and desire are not meant to hold our identity and security. And I'm surprised in myself, I'll speak for myself, how often I have put too much of my fulfillment in a gift instead of the giver.
So is your advice to stop trying to protect ourselves from disappointment?
Yeah. Don't do that.
So how do we do that? How do we stop trying to protect ourselves from that? Or our children even?
Yes, I think the main key that I have found, the success I've been able to practice in this is that gratitude and thankfulness.
Yeah.
If I can recognize, if I can note and name the ways that God has been faithful, if I can dig for delight in the present and recognize his presence with me now, that is what gives me courage to dream and courage to celebrate, knowing that God is going to be present in both places because he's been faithful to me thus far.
Oh, I love that.
I just wrote down dig for delight.
Yeah, I did. I'm glad you did because I love that dig for delight.
I love that too.
Nicole, what does celebration look like in your home? What does that look like for you?
So along with the lines of the digging for delight, when the pandemic started, my family started this rhythm of looking for sea glass. We live on the coast up here in Connecticut and lots of beaches to look for sea glass on. And what started as a way of entertaining our energetic boys when everything was shut down became our family's rhythm of collecting and digging for delight. And I'm amazed how we find what we look for and how that's become such a metaphor for other ways of noticing. But we now have thousands of pieces. I wish I could show you my color-coded jars filled with all this sea glass. And when I wrote the chapter where I talk about sea glass in my book, it's been about 2 years since I wrote it because there's such a lapse between writing and release. And what I can tell you now that I wasn't able to know in the book is that when I see those jars, I see all the ways that God has woven friendship and community and laughter into my family. And the digging for delight in the present has become his fingerprints of faithfulness in our story. And I look back and noticing and naming those things, I'm not sure I would have caught that had we not played together in that way. I practice savoring, especially with my kiddos. You know, there's a lot of long days as a mom of littles and, you know, moments that we might be tempted to wish away or feel really mundane and not very special. But asking my five senses, what am I going to remember about holding my daughter who just turned 1 yesterday?
Wow.
And ritual is another really great way to celebrate as a family. Us having a special meal every week at the same day and time, or meeting with a certain group of people to celebrate the ways that God is showing up in your lives. So,
I love that. I love that you have an illustration that you can see all the time of the sea glass. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's perfect. So you talk about, and I mentioned cynicism a minute ago, but how cynicism and joy cannot coexist. That was really a light bulb for me when I started. I don't know. I mean, I think we all kind of know when we feel the cynicism creeping in a certain area, but to think about that it's really an adversary to me experiencing joy was a new thought for me. Can you unpack that just a little bit?
Yeah, I think pessimism and cynicism are similar, in that they're control, and they're that attempt to guard against the possibility of disappointment. Really, you're trying to guard against vulnerability. And joy is a very vulnerable thing to feel because it automatically accompanies the possibility of loss or disappointment. How cynicism is a little different than pessimism is it doubts somebody's motive. So not just that the circumstances aren't going to turn out the way I want, but where this really showed up for me was in my relationship with God. What if the goodness in my life only is ever going to look like broccoli on a dinner plate? Like something that's good for me, but not anything I'm ever going to be excited about. And really some distortions about his character and but still things that I carried as fear. And so just doubting his motives. And when I'm doing that, I am unable to lift my gaze to see what is possible with God. In Ecclesiastes, it talks a lot about this idea of pain and joy and what that relationship looks like. And the author says that when we are so focused on the problem, when we're pessimistic and thinking about rehearsing all the ways that that thing could go wrong, it only ever shows us different angles of the same problem. Our fear is just giving us a tour of all the angles of that problem or potential issue. And yet when we lift our gaze, when we do find hope and recognize that I don't hope because of what I receive, I hope because of who I receive, then I'm able to see more possibilities of what's possible with God.
That's so
That
good.
is beautiful. And it's like now, 40-year-old Casey, I can't talk about joy without talking about pain. And I can't talk about pain without talking about joy, because to me, they're this beautiful blend of God's whole kingdom, like the broken and the beautiful and the joy and the pain. It's all of it. I love that you talked about that. Oh, I could talk to you all day. I mean, really. But
I know, it's so true. Well, I wanted to tell you a quick story. I was talking to a coworker just a couple of days ago who sent me some files, and his response was, "Are they usable?" And I immediately thought, "Oh no, was there a problem? Like what?" And I said, "Are you concerned?" And he said, "I'm an Enneagram 6. Of course I'm concerned." And my reply to him was just simply the title of your book. What if it's wonderful? That's what but I started thinking about just asking that question when we're faced with something that's scary, or
what if it's wonderful?
Something we're doubting, or something we hope goes okay, or something we feel like might go badly, or whatever is happening. It just stopping and saying, but what if it's wonderful?
Yeah.
You know?
I love that.
It's
a good question.
Yeah. How did you arrive at the title?
I tell that story in the first chapter, but I was having a conversation very similar to this one, and I was struggling. I just hope didn't feel like a good idea. Dreaming felt stupid. I just felt like I was at the end of my rope, and all I could see was the pain I was in instead of what was possible. And I was sitting on my friend's kitchen counter stool, and she was making me tea. And I'd sat in her house many times, so I don't know why I had not noticed this sign above her kitchen window before. But it's this cute little wooden sign that just says, what if it's actually going to be okay? And we were having this intense conversation about my pain and about what was going on in my story at that time. And almost like the sign expected an answer. I was like, oh my gosh, what if it's actually going to be okay? He turned to me and said, oh, sweetie, what if it's wonderful? And that I kept that question. Yeah, I've kept it with me. And let me be honest with you too. I take my title to the face all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I said in an interview not too long ago that this is a story that's changed my life and a message that's changed my life. But the real answer is it's changing my life. These are practices I'm still working on. I definitely write this story, yes, from biblical truth and psychological research and how I've grown, but I'm also growing in those same areas and write it from the mud pit too.
Yeah, that's great.
I love that. Well, our show is called Hope Unabridged, and we like to ask everyone, where are you finding hope these days?
Oh, what a great question. I love that. I think in that daily digging for delight.
Yeah.
It's such a empowering practice, and I'm amazed how many times I come into it not very expectant, and it just shifts my perspective when I'm able to see God's provision and get outside of my own vision of what that's supposed to look like, and just have eyes to see how He's showing up in all of our lives.
I love that.
I love that so much.
Well, this has been a great conversation, and we're so thankful that you were able to give us a few minutes of your time and come on the show and share it with us.
Yes, thanks for being here.
What a privilege for me. It was really, really fun to talk with you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us today on Hope Unabridged. We'd like to remind you that if you're watching us on Good Life 45, you can also listen to these episodes everywhere you listen to podcasts.
And if you're listening and you would like to see the filmed version of this show or any of our other shows, check us out on Good Life 45 or on our YouTube channel and our app.
We hope that something you've heard today really blessed you, and we would love for you to share this show with those you love. Just hit that share button on your podcast app or on YouTube and send it to a friend. We would also love it if you would leave us a review. With this program, we are finding hope in the unedited stories of our lives, and we want you to do the same.